graduates in San Francisco started a project with a goal: make sure trans people didn't have to hire a lawyer just to prove that they existed. Today, that project, the Transgender Law Center, is the largest transgender-led civil rights organization in the country. Using an intersectionality-based policy analysis framework, we will discuss the Transgender Law Center and its place in the trans liberation movement. TLC was founded in 2002 as a project of the National Center for Lesbian Rights and became its own independent nonprofit in 2004. Since then, it has had countless legal wins. In 2015, TLC's case for Shiloh Quinn, a trans woman held in a men's prison, established that California had to provide gender-affirming care and move her to a women's prison. In 2017, TLC's case for Ash Whitaker set a precedent protecting trans students' rights to use school facilities matching their gender identity. And right now, TLC is in active litigation in Kingdom v. Trump, fighting a federal policy that stripped gender-affirming care from trans people in federal prisons. And it's still being fought as we speak. TLC's work starts from a value that trans people are experts on their own lives. Their mission explicitly prioritizes people with disabilities, people living with HIV, and BIPOC communities. That is a direct challenge to the assumption embedded in a lot of US policy that gender is something the state defines and verifies rather than something a person lives and knows. So whose voices are actually centered? Black and brown trans women, trans immigrants, incarcerated trans people living with HIV. These are all groups that get talked about the least in mainstream LGBTQ organizing, and TLC builds its advocacy platform specifically around them because of this. It's on the premise that gender is not something that needs to be verified by anyone else, and everyone deserves a life of dignity. The problem is not one law. It's how gender identity discrimination shows up across nearly every system a person touches. In healthcare, gender-affirming care bans like Arkansas's SAFE Act and Tennessee's SB1 have been compounded by hospitals like NYU now being required to hand over trans minors' medical records to the federal government. In identity documents, many states still require proof of surgery or a court order just to correct a birth certificate. In employment, Bostock v. Clayton County technically bars firing someone just for being transgender, but discrimination persists unevenly. And in prisons, housing assignments based on sex at birth still exist and raise the risk of assault and solitary confinement for trans people. From a social welfare standpoint, this matters because these are the exact systems social workers operate inside every day. None of this started out of the blue. Before 1969, cross-dressing laws let police arrest trans people simply for existing in public spaces. The Stonewall Uprising in 1969 and the HIV/AIDS crisis of the 80s and 90s, when insurance excluded trans healthcare entirely and changing an ID was nearly impossible, built decades of exclusion into the legal system. TLC was founded in 2002 directly from that gap. And since 2021, the country has seen an explosion of anti-trans legislation, restricting sports participation, bathroom use, to healthcare access. This means that the story about the fight for trans liberation is not past tense, it is still being written. None of this lands evenly. Trans people overall face higher rates of poverty, homelessness, and assault, but those risks compound differently depending on who you are. Undocumented trans immigrants face detention and healthcare denial on top of the fear of persecution they were fleeing in the first place. Disabled trans people need more frequent contact with healthcare systems, and many are not competent on transphobia or ableism. Rural trans people travel long distances for basic care and often lack community. Low-income trans people can't afford to travel or fight a legal battle over a birth certificate. And Black trans women face the sharpest compounding of misogyny, racism, transphobia, and policing, and it's reflected in the data on fatal violence against Black trans women in this country. So let's examine the pattern here. Institutions that are supposed to be neutral, hospitals, schools, prisons, courts, they are frequently the sites of traumatic experiences and the worst discrimination. That's not a coincidence. It reflects a structural choice about who these systems were built to protect and who they were never designed to include in the first place. 3 examples show both wins and limits. Bostock v. Clayton County in 2020 made it illegal to fire someone for being transgender, which was a real win, although it only covers employment and is enforced unevenly. It doesn't touch discrimination in public life more broadly. Section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act offers a broader healthcare protection, but in November 2025, its gender identity provisions were removed. And right now, the TLC and the ACLU are actively fighting Kingdom v. Trump, a lawsuit over a federal policy stripping gender-affirming care from trans people in prison. A judge granted a preliminary injunction in June 2025, but the administration has kept trying to roll it back since. In short, we've gotten to a point where real legal protections do exist, but their strength depends entirely on who is enforcing them and how long the fight remains winnable. So what's overlooked? Older trans adults, trans people with disabilities, trans sex workers, detained trans immigrants, they all rarely make headlines, but they all face some of the highest rates of violence and institutional neglect. Reliable data on trans poverty, homelessness, incarceration is still thin, which itself is a policy failure. You can't fix what you refuse to acknowledge or count. TLC's vision of change is not just one of winning lawsuits. It pairs litigation with community organizing and mutual aid, direct legal services, and emergency support that don't require waiting years for a court to finish a case. It builds coalitions, including the one that it has currently with the ACLU. And its restorative and healing justice approach, fighting for incarcerated trans people to receive basic medical care rather than accepting incarceration itself as a given, is built around defending people who are inside the system, working to get them out, rather than proposing ways to accommodate the system. That is an abolitionist orientation in practice, even if the TLC does not use that wording. For social workers, the takeaway is that advocate for policy alongside your clients. Don't rely just on individual case management and therapy. Build a practice that supports safety and healing without funneling people deeper into the very system this movement is trying to help them survive and exit. The fight for trans rights really, right now, is a fight over who gets to decide who is safe, who is real, and who is protected. 20 plus years of the Transgender Law Center's work says that decision belongs to trans people themselves. Thank you for watching.